Hey, what's up? We're back with another video. Now today, we're gonna be reacting to things that still don't make sense about the Civil War. Let's go. Ready?
When it comes to the American Civil War, we think we know what happened and why, but do we? Even 60 years later, there are things about the conflict that make no sense, at least in retrospect. When Louisiana joined the Confederacy in early 1861, it brought with it the thriving port of New Orleans, a wealthy and populous city that was, briefly, the largest in the Southern Coalition, for about a second, that is, because New Orleans was the first major Southern city to be captured by Union forces, surrendering in April 1862. This was a huge blunder on the part of the Confederacy. They looked, to put it bluntly, totally incompetent, and not without good reason. They just basically given up one of their side's greatest assets and set the Union up to start clawing back control of the vital Mississippi River from both directions. And on top of that, the Union also made away with $800,000 in gold that had been stored in the Dutch consul's office. How had the Confederacy biffed so hard? New Orleans had few defenses around the town itself. They counted on Forts Jackson and St. Philip, two small Mississippi River outposts, to stop any ships trying to move north to the city. And there was a heavy chain that could be stretched across the river to prevent ships from passing. Union Navy Captain David Farragut simply broke the chain and sent its boats right through, while gunships fired on the Confederate forts, limiting their ability to respond. Sounds basic, but the strategy worked, and New Orleans fell into Union hands like a freshly fried beignet. It wasn't far from Confederate Virginia, like it was this close, but the North didn't move the U.S. capital from Washington during the war. As for the Confederacy, they originally and wisely made Montgomery, Alabama their capital city. Good move, keeping the center of their government far from Union forces. But then they changed their minds. Once Virginia seceded, the Confederacy moved its capital to Richmond and kept it there until shortly before the end of the war.
It's only 100 miles from Washington, D.C. Seems kind of stupid.
They did have a good reason for the move. The short answer is that Virginia was important. Richmond was the second largest city in the Confederacy after New Orleans, which means it's the largest city in the Confederacy. It was also relatively industrial, contributing essential factories to the agricultural South's war effort.
Random question in the comments, y'all. Did the Confederacy have boats? Or did just the Union have them?
Then there was the psychological factor. Virginia was heavily associated with the Revolution, so it was somewhat of a catch for the South. The people of Virginia would pay a heavy price for the defiant, even sassy placement of the Confederate capital. Northern Virginia was one of the most horrific meat grinders of the war, and by war's end, Richmond was in ruins.
The art of war is simple enough. Fight it out till the end.
Well, the almost end. Danville, Virginia, served as the capital of the Confederacy at the very, very end of the war, from about April 3rd to April 10th.
Factor clearly gets active lifestyles. They're developed by dietitians and prepared by chefs, so they're actually good.
The Civil War ended in 1865, so even the youngest veterans would have been lucky to reach the middle of the next century. And yet, 90-year-old Irene Triplett died in North Carolina in May 2020, having collected a Civil War pension of $73.13 per month until her very last day.
Wow.
When Triplett was born, her mother Elida Hall was 34, but her father Mose Triplett was 83. Originally in the Confederate Army with the 26th North Carolina Infantry, Mose had conveniently fallen ill before the Battle of Gettysburg. Good thing for him, because most of the men in his unit were killed, injured, or captured in the battle. Then, and this was key for Irene's future, Mose switched sides and joined a Union regiment, which entitled him to an Army pension for life.
Yeah, it was on both sides. And, oh boy, it was a mess. I mean, a mess.
We have people that talk to Civil War veterans alive today. That's crazy. Well, she's dead now, but that are alive in this time. That's crazy.
This may have been what attracted his much younger second wife. The heart wants what the heart wants, and sometimes that's a guaranteed monthly pension payment. As a dependent child of a veteran who had, in the nick of time, served on the winning side, Irene was entitled to government support for life.
It is a good story. It keeps on getting better.
Supposedly, Abraham Lincoln said early in the Civil War, "I hope to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky." But why? Besides the fact that he was born there, what else does it have besides that blue grass? The important part was the state's northern border, most of which was the Ohio River. Confederate interference, or, God forbid, control of the waterway would be an enormous roadblock for the Union. If you're having flashbacks to the New Orleans stuff we talked about before, thanks for paying attention. And then there were the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers, key invasion routes into the South in the event Kentucky stayed with the Union. At the top of the war, Kentucky declared itself neutral, probably because they were a state of slaveholders that also had important cultural and economic ties to the North.
So conflicted.
A neutral Kentucky unwilling to cooperate with Union war aims was much better for the South than a Union-allied Kentucky. But once again, the South absolutely biffed this opportunity. In April 1861, the Louisville Journal reported a senator from Georgia saying that the border states would have to do all the fighting, which would allow the rest of the South to go about its business raising slaves and cotton. Being a border state, Kentucky didn't like that attitude, and they liked it even less when the Confederate Congress banned the export of cotton to the North. The tipping point was the Confederate invasion of Kentucky. They seized the small city of Columbus, Kentucky, as part of a failed plan to take the port of Paducah. Suddenly, the Union's invitation to join them was very appealing, and Kentucky did so on September 18, 1861. There were 11 Confederate states, but the Confederate flag has 13 stars because the South so desperately wanted to manifest the addition of Kentucky and Missouri to the CSA fold. And math's hard. As you probably know, it didn't happen, although both states did have Confederate-side governments. The capital of Kentucky's alt government was Bowling Green, which it lost to Union forces in early 1862. But in a radical departure from actual logic, Confederate Missouri set up its capital in Marshall, Texas. In case geography class is a distant or non-existent memory for you, Texas is nowhere near Missouri. Marshall was an important manufacturing hub for the South and eventually became the capital of the Confederate West, but still, nowhere near Missouri. So what's up with that?
That makes no sense.
At first, Missouri tried to be neutral like Kentucky, but the Union strategically placed units around the state, solidifying control of all-important St. Louis. Are you catching the river theme yet?
Interesting. Yeah, yeah, hell yeah.
The Union's smart maneuvers essentially took St. Louis and the state capital of Jefferson City out of the running for the shadow government, so why not Texas? At least the state's southern figureheads, or rather officials, were sitting pretty hundreds of miles away from fighting. Oh, but what they actually did from there isn't clear. The obvious answer is geography is hard too.
She was looking for geology and misread the sign. Yeah, I said, we do not study countries in here.
The Union worked hard to keep outside powers, particularly strong European countries, from officially recognizing the Confederacy as a legit government. The North worried that manufacturing nations who depended on raw southern cotton to feed their industry, especially Britain, would back the South to keep their looms running. Fortunately, aggressive Union diplomacy, the South's repeated blunders, European unease with backing a government of slaveholders, and crises at home kept Europe mostly on the sidelines, with one exception. The outlier was the little duchy of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, a small state that existed before Germany congealed into a unified country. It wasn't a financial or industrial power, and it wasn't especially easy to find on a map.
Never heard of it.
It's quite small.
Told you geography is hard. Nevertheless, Consul Ernst Raven from plucky little Saxe-Coburg-Gotha arrived in Texas in 1861, bringing his country's official support along with him. But Saxe-Coburg-Gotha soon joined the Confederacy on the list of countries that no longer exist. It was rolled up under the umbrella of the German Empire in 1871 and formally dissolved with the rest of Germany's hereditary monarchies in 1918 after World War I. In case that name's been on the tip of your tongue this whole time, Saxe-Coburg-Gotha's major export was Prince Albert, the guy who married Britain's Queen Victoria. He's not the one in the can. That was his son, the future Edward VII. Judah Benjamin was one of the most colorful and controversial members of the Confederate government. Born into a Jewish family in the West Indies, he immigrated to New Orleans as a child and later built a successful career as a lawyer. He represented Louisiana in the U.S. Senate in 1852. He later joined the Confederate government as Attorney General, then Secretary of War, and finally Secretary of State. When it was clear that the Confederacy was crumbling, Benjamin knew it was time to go. So sometime in early May, with the war over but the Confederate government still scuttling through the ruined South, Benjamin took off. The details of his escape are slim and heavily mythologized. One account has him pretending to be French. But since Benjamin never wrote his memoirs and burned his personal papers before his death, we'll never know what really happened. What we do know is that he was the only major member of the Confederate government to successfully escape the imploding South. He made it to Havana and then to Britain, where he revived his law career. and after his death in 1884, he was buried in Paris's famed Père Lachaise Cemetery. During the Civil War, black Americans, often freedmen who'd been liberated by the Union Army, served with distinction, under Union colors, obviously. But in early 1865, one of the "we'll try anything stupid once" ideas the dying South had was to arm enslaved men and order them to fight for the soon-to-be-lost cause that wanted to keep them enslaved. Really? Confederacy? No surprise, it went badly. Arguments raged about whether the enslaved men should be freed in exchange for their service. The men in question were suspected of taking up for the South in order to escape across Union lines. Shocker, that one. And the Confederate establishment was so jittery about putting weapons in the hands of men they treated as possessions that very few were actually conscripted into the fight for Richmond.
Remember me?
Just a few weeks later, the Confederacy was done, and soon thereafter, slavery was abolished in the United States. The legend of the lost Confederate gold is alive and well and aggressively fueling History Channel search parties, and there is at least some truth to the story. In 1934, 2 Baltimore boys found a cache of gold coins, and in 2023, a Civil War-era gold hoard was found in Kentucky. The Confederacy was bad at record keeping, and geography and math, as you now know, and the chaos of war meant that assets could easily go missing. One such jackpot was the remains of the Confederate treasury, which limped south through Virginia and the Carolinas, with Jefferson Davis and the Confederate government who were on the run after the fall of Richmond. Much of this money was used to pay Confederate soldiers returning home, but $250,000, in 1865 money no less, was stolen by bandits. Much of it was never recovered, and treasure hunters hold on to the hope some of it is still hidden somewhere in rural Georgia. Wilkes County, right around the city of Washington, ironically enough, is the place that persistently is the rumored location, but nothing's ever been found there. The idea of hot air balloons as weapons of war might sound silly, but these impractical modes of transport were used by both the Union and Confederate forces looking for a bird's-eye view of the enemy. Inflated with gas or portable hydrogen generators, Civil War military balloons could carry 1 to 5 men.
This civilian is going to direct my fire from that balloon, sir?
Both sides sent up manned reconnaissance balloons during the 7 Days Campaign, when the Confederates pushed back Union attempts to capture Richmond despite Union balloons having eyes on the city's downtown. But a little earlier in the war, Union General Fitz-John Porter had an alarming experience when the observation balloon he was in broke loose from its tether and drifted over Confederate lines. Hotshots notwithstanding, Porter drifted back into Union-held territory and safely descended, going on to sketch the Confederate positions he'd observed. The Union program was disbanded in 1863, although a fragmentary account exists of balloon use during the siege of Petersburg in 1864. Confederate efforts petered out after one balloon fell prey to friendly fire and another was captured.
That was really interesting. I didn't know all that. Like, I knew black soldiers did serve in the Confederacy, but I didn't know, like, to the depth of how they did it. But yeah, that's extremely interesting. All right, well, you already know what it is. I'm out. Let's go.